Greetings, folks. Iolair here to talk about taking IFHE on secondary builds, and more specifically for the Bismarck and the Tirpitz, since their secondaries received an important buff in 0.8.6. The topic of IFHE and secondaries is something that I covered in my general secondary build video a few weeks ago, and I'll leave a link to that video in the description below. In this match, I take the Tirpitz B into a co-op battle as I was working through some of the missions for the French destroyer event, and I put the commander from my Friedliche Große, which does have IFHE, on the ship, and I got some interesting results from the secondaries that I thought to share with you. Since this is co-op, there isn't going to be much in the way of tactics to discuss, which is why I'm sort of running an accelerated replay. I will point out that I find that if I'm the only human or one of very few on a co-op team, that it's important to limit my engagements to one-on-one, so I take down each opposing ship individually. I find that if I sail into the middle of a bunch of opposing bots, they may very well take me down and focus me out, and then that will leave the results of the game in the hands of my allied bots, which I'm not very enthusiastic about. So there's plenty of time here, now that I've taken out the opposing Tirpitz, to head down south and still win this game for the team. So in 0.8.6, or prior to 0.8.6, I should say, the Tirpitz and Bismarck's 105mm secondaries, which comprise the majority of their secondaries, only had 1/6 penetration, which is the norm for the majority of ships in the game. And this meant that without IFHE, they could penetrate up to 17mm, and with IFHE, they could penetrate up to 22mm. Now, with a 17mm penetration, that was reasonably effective to be able to penetrate mid-tier destroyers and cruisers, some superstructures of mid-tier battleships, but otherwise they were ineffective for alpha damage against most things upper tier, including destroyers and battleships and cruisers, or the majority of them, and their main value was really to set fires. And then if you took IFHE prior to 0.8.6 on these 105mm secondaries, they could penetrate up to 22mm, which would allow you to cross the superstructure threshold of all ships and the hull threshold for upper tier destroyers, but that was about it. And there were a couple other cruisers like the Minotaur and Neptune and so on, which would also be vulnerable to alpha with IFHE. However, now with this new buff, the 105mm secondaries without IFHE can penetrate up to 26mm, which is able to penetrate all superstructures of all ships, most destroyers, a lot of cruisers, and generally are much more effective for alpha damage. And with IFHE, they now penetrate above 32mm, which is sort of this magic threshold that many proponents of IFHE on secondary builds point to, because that allows them to penetrate the bows and sterns of all, even up to tier 10 battleships, as well as the surfaces of many battleships, especially like the French battleships, which are sort of covered in 32mm plating. In my view, if you don't see a lot of up-tiering, and with the revised matchmaking that Wargaming's working on for tier 8, you may not see as much up-tiering. It may not be very valuable still to take IFHE on the Bismarck and the Tirpitz. I think it will be sort of like your mileage will vary sort of argument to see whether you think that it's worthwhile. But it is something to check out and something to consider. So in this match, I'm just going to let my secondaries chew up the aircraft carrier, and we'll get to the results. So I have 331 secondary hits, but that's not the important point. You often see players put up these stupendous secondary battery hit numbers, but what really matters is the third detail report page. How much alpha damage and fire production did you get from the secondary batteries? And in this case, I almost got 16,000 per 100 secondary hits, or about 17,000 per secondary hits, which is very productive. But the main value, in my opinion, is probably only to penetrate the Vladivostok and the opposing Tirpitz. And the majority of the damage that I did for secondaries was actually against the other ships. So again, it's not entirely clear to me that IFHE, for the secondaries of the Bismarck and Tirpitz are really worthwhile, but it might be something for you to explore. So I hope you enjoyed the replay, the commentary, and the input here. Please do leave your comments below. And as always, we hope to see you out there, and we wish you happy sailing.